What if the cruelest words your ex-husband ever said to you were not only a lie, but also shielded a secret so monumental it could shatter his world and rewrite your future? Amelia Rosewood was just trying to survive the wreckage of her marriage when her ex Mark publicly shamed her, calling her fat. He sneered, enjoying her pain, completely oblivious to the truth. Amelia wasn't overweight. She was pregnant. And the father wasn't some random rebound. He was Julian Devereaux, a reclusive billionaire whose name alone commanded respect and fear. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's the story of how one man's bitter cruelty became the catalyst for a life Amelia never could have dreamed of. The scent of rain-soaked pavement and wilting gardenias clung to the air as Amelia Rosewood locked the door to her small flower shop, petal and stem. A sigh escaped her lips, misting in the chilly October evening. It had been a year since the divorce, a year of rebuilding, of transforming the rubble of her old life into something she could call her own. The shop was her sanctuary, a place of vibrant life and delicate beauty that stood in stark contrast to the barren landscape of her marriage to Mark Vance. Their marriage had been a slow erosion of her soul. Mark, a man obsessed with appearances, had chiseled away at her confidence until she felt like a rough, unlovable stone. He valued status-polished surfaces and the right connections. Amelia, with her love for dirt-stained fingers, old books, and quiet evenings, had never quite fit into the glossy picture he wanted to project. The divorce had been his idea, a strategic uncoupling, as he'd called it, leaving her with a modest settlement and a cavernous sense of failure. Just as she turned to leave, a sleek black Aston Martin pulled up to the curb, its engine a low, predatory growl. The passenger door opened, and a woman with legs that seemed to start at her collarbone unfolded herself from the car. Tiffany, Mark's new fiancée, a model whose face was plastered on half the billboards in the city. And then from the driver's side emerged Mark himself. He looked infuriatingly good, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Amelia's monthly rent. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Amelia's figure. She instinctively pulled her oversized cardigan tighter around herself. It had been a comfort garment these last few weeks, soft and forgiving as her body began to change in subtle ways. "Amelia," Mark said, his voice dripping with condescending surprise. "Still playing with flowers, I see. I thought you'd have given up on this little hobby by now." "It's a business, Mark, and it's doing just fine," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Tiffany drifted to his side, her arm snaking around his. She looked Amelia up and down with a dismissive air, her gaze lingering on Amelia's slightly softer midsection. Mark followed her gaze, and a cruel, familiar smirk spread across his face. It was the same smirk he used to give her when she'd chosen a book over one of his corporate parties, or when she'd accidentally spilled wine on his white sofa. "Wow, Amelia," he said, his voice loud enough for a passing couple to turn and look. "Letting yourself go, haven't you? The divorce diet didn't quite work out. You should really watch that. No man wants a woman who looks comfortable." He paused for effect, savoring the word like a sour candy. "You've gotten fat." The word hit her like a physical blow. Fat! It was his old weapon, the one he'd sharpened and used against her for years. Every calorie counted, every dessert refused, every compliment backhanded. For a moment the world tilted, the streetlights blurring into streaks of mocking gold. The humiliation was a hot flush that crawled up her neck. She could feel Tiffany's silent, smug judgment and the curious stares of the strangers on the sidewalk. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that the gentle swell of her belly wasn't from letting herself go. It was a secret she held close, a tiny fluttering life that was hers and hers alone. It was the result of a single whirlwind night 2 months ago. A night of unexpected kindness, passion, and anonymity with a man whose face she could still see perfectly in her mind's eye, but whose name she never learned. A man who had treated her with more tenderness in a few hours than Mark had in a decade. But she said nothing. Showing him that he had hurt her would be giving him a victory he didn't deserve. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a fire he hadn't seen in years. "My body is no longer any of your concern, Mark," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Enjoy your evening." Without another glance, she turned and walked away, her back straight, each step a declaration of war against the shame he tried to drape over her. She didn't let the tears fall until she was safely inside her small apartment, the door bolted behind her. She slid down to the floor, wrapping her arms around her stomach, protecting the one pure, hopeful thing in her life from the toxic echo of his words. He had called her fat. The irony was a bitter pill. He thought he was shaming her for a failure, for a lack of discipline. He had no idea he was mocking the very beginning of a new life, a life connected to a world of power and wealth he could only dream of. He had just insulted the future mother of Julian Devereaux's child. And he was about to find out that some stones, when chiseled away, reveal not weakness, but a diamond-hard core. The next few weeks were a blur of nausea and anxiety. Mark's words had burrowed under Amelia's skin, not because she believed them, but because they represented a tangible threat. He was still in her orbit, a dark planet of negativity, and his casual cruelty was a reminder of the power he once held over her. To make matters worse, she received an official-looking letter from a real estate development firm, Vance & Associates, expressing a strong interest in acquiring the entire commercial block where Petal and Stem was located. The letter was polite, professional, but the name at the bottom of the letterhead made her blood run cold: Mark Vance, CEO. He wasn't just content with a public jab. He was coming for her sanctuary. It was a classic Mark move: destroy what he couldn't control. He knew the shop was her heart and soul, the one thing she had built from scratch. Taking it away would be the ultimate checkmate in a game she didn't even want to play. Stress coiled in her stomach, a constant companion to the morning sickness. She spent sleepless nights poring over her lease agreement, her limited savings, and the terrifyingly generous offer from his firm, knowing it was an offer designed to be refused, allowing him to use other more aggressive tactics. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while she was wrestling with a stubborn branch of eucalyptus, the bell above her shop door chimed. A man stood there, shaking rain from a long dark coat. He was tall, with a presence that seemed to shrink the cozy confines of her shop. His hair was the color of dark sable, and his eyes, a startling shade of stormy gray, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Her heart didn't just flutter, it slammed against her ribs. It was him. The man from that night. The stranger from the charity gala she'd worked as a freelance florist. He'd found her in a quiet corner, escaping the noise, and they had started talking. He hadn't asked what she did or who she knew. He'd asked what she dreamt about. He listened with an attentiveness that was almost unnerving. The connection was immediate, electric. One drink led to another, and the night had ended in his penthouse suite overlooking the city, a blur of soft sheets, whispered confidences, and a gentleness that had unraveled her. She had slipped out before dawn, embarrassed by her impulsiveness, convinced it was a one-time magical fluke she should file away and never speak of. She hadn't even left a note. "I was hoping I'd find you here," he said, his voice a low baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "It took my people a while. Rosewood. It's a beautiful name." I don't understand," she stammered, clutching a pair of shears. "I'm Julian Devereaux," he said, as if that should explain everything. And in a way it did. The name was legendary. Devereaux Industries was a global behemoth involved in everything from tech to sustainable energy. Julian Devereaux was the brilliant, enigmatic heir who had taken over the empire and multiplied its worth, all while remaining obsessively private. He was a ghost in the world of finance, a myth, and he was standing in her flower shop. He took a step closer, his gray eyes scanning her face, then drifting down, hesitating for a fraction of a second on her midsection, which her apron couldn't entirely conceal. His expression was unreadable. "I've been looking for you since that night, Amelia," he said, his voice softer now. "I should have asked for your number. It was presumptuous of me to assume I could just find you." "Why?" The word was a breath. "Why were you looking for me?" His gaze met hers, and all the power, all the legendary status seemed to melt away, leaving only the man she remembered from that night. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you, and because I felt that I owed you more than a silent goodbye in the morning." He paused, and his eyes flickered down again, a flicker of understanding dawning on his face. "And now I have a feeling there's another reason." The air grew thick with unspoken words. This was it, the moment of truth. Her secret, so carefully guarded, was about to be laid bare before a man who was practically a stranger, a man who could crush her life with a single phone call or disappear back into his stratosphere of wealth, leaving her utterly alone. Taking a deep breath, she put down the shears. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know." He simply nodded, his gaze unwavering, and waited. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. "It's yours." For a long moment there was only the sound of rain tapping against the window panes. Julian didn't move, didn't speak. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, bracing for denial, for anger, for the cold dismissal she'd half expected. Then he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't touch her, but stood so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His stormy eyes were no longer unreadable. They were filled with a complex storm of emotions, shock, awe, and something else she couldn't dare to name. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. It was the last question she expected. Not, "Are you sure?" or "How much do you want?" but "Are you okay?" Tears pricked her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. A slow, wondrous smile touched his lips. "Okay," he said as if to himself. "A baby." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the smile widened. "Our baby." He reached out his hand, hesitating just before it touched her arm. "You're not alone in this, Amelia. I want to be clear about that. You are not alone." Just then her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from her lawyer. Mark's firm just sent a notice of intent to invoke a municipal development clause. "It's a very aggressive move. We need to talk." The stress came rushing back, a cold wave of dread. Julian noticed the shift in her expression instantly. "What is it?" "It's my ex-husband," she said, her voice tight. "He's trying to buy this building. He's trying to force me out." Julian's jaw tightened. The protective warmth in his eyes hardened into something glacial. "What's his name?" "Mark Vance." A flicker of recognition crossed Julian's face, followed by a look of profound distaste. "Vance and Associates. Small-time developer with a big ego. I've heard of him." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with swift precision across the screen. "Consider it handled." "Handled? What do you mean?" He looked up from his phone, and the full force of the Devereaux power was now aimed not at her, but for her. "I mean," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous promise, "that Mr. Vance is about to have a very, very bad day." Julian Devereaux did not make idle threats. Less than 24 hours after he uttered the words, "Consider it handled," Amelia received a frantic call from her lawyer. "I don't know what you did, Amelia." Her lawyer, a harried man named David Chen, said, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. "But Vance and Associates has completely withdrawn their offer. Not just that they sent a formal letter of apology for any undue stress their inquiry may have caused." Amelia leaned against the counter of her shop, a bouquet of half-arranged peonies in her hand. "What? How? I have no idea. But wait, it gets crazier. An hour ago I was contacted by the legal team for Argent Estates. They're a holding company, a big one. They informed me that as of 8 a.m. this morning, they are the new owners of the entire commercial block, including your building. They've also sent over a new lease for you to sign." Amelia's heart sank. "Oh, God, so I'm just being forced out by someone else." No, that's the thing," David exclaimed. "The new lease is for 10 years, and your rent is being decreased by 30%. The terms are ironclad in your favor. They've also included a clause for a fully funded renovation of the shop at your discretion. Amelia, who do you know? Amelia looked out the shop window where a sleek, dark town car was just pulling up to the curb. I think I'm about to find out. Julian stepped out of the car looking as impeccable as ever. He entered the shop, the bell chiming softly. He offered her a small, contained smile. Argent Estates, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. One of my smaller real estate holding companies, he confirmed, walking over to inspect a white orchid. I thought it would be simpler to own the building. Now you don't have to worry about landlords, at least not unfriendly ones. The scale of his power was staggering. For Mark, buying the block was a strategic, difficult power play. For Julian, it was a Tuesday morning transaction. He had built a fortress around her with a few keystrokes protecting her and her unborn child from a threat he had only just learned about. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and in a way she was afraid to admit incredibly comforting. Julian, it's too much, she said, her head spinning. The only thing that is too much is your ex-husband believing he can harass you without consequence, he stated calmly. He finally turned from the orchid to face her, his gray eyes serious. Amelia, I need you to understand something. This baby, our baby, changes everything. You and this child are now my priority. Your safety, your peace of mind, that is my responsibility. Whether you and I become anything more, that is a separate conversation we can have at our own pace. But my commitment to this child is absolute, and that commitment extends to you. Over the next few weeks, Julian began to carefully weave himself into her life. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something quieter, more deliberate. He would show up at the shop at closing time with dinner from restaurants she'd only ever read about. They would eat, sitting on stools amidst the scent of roses and lilies, talking for hours. He never pushed, never demanded. He listened. He learned about her dream of opening the shop, about the years with Mark, about the quiet joys she found in creating something beautiful with her hands. In turn, he slowly opened up his world to her. He took her to a private wing of the city's art museum, which he had opened just for them. He walked her through the galleries, his knowledge of art as deep and impressive as his business acumen. He introduced her to his personal chef, a warm Italian woman named Sophia, who began discreetly stocking Amelia's fridge with healthy, delicious meals to help with her pregnancy. But Julian's world came with its own set of challenges, the largest of which was his family, specifically his mother. Eleanor Devereux was the matriarch of the dynasty, a woman of formidable will and icy elegance. She had single-handedly guided the family and the company through a tumultuous period after her husband's death, before Julian was old enough to take the reins. Her approval was the one currency in the world that Julian couldn't simply acquire. He brought Amelia to the Devereux family estate for dinner one Sunday, a sprawling stone mansion that looked more like a European palace than a home. Eleanor greeted Amelia not with a handshake, but with a clinical head-to-toe appraisal. She was polite, her words perfectly crafted, but her eyes were like chips of ice. So, Eleanor said over a dinner served by silent, white-gloved staff. You are the florist. She said the word as if it were a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby like collecting porcelain cats. Yes, I own a shop downtown, Amelia replied, keeping her voice even. Julian tells me you were previously married. Eleanor continued, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. Divorced, I believe. That's correct. The Devereux family values discretion, stability. A clean history is paramount. She said, her gaze sharp and pointed. It was a clear warning. Amelia was an outsider, a complication with a past. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. She was a gold digger, a commoner who had somehow trapped her billionaire son. Julian, who had been silent, placed his hand over Amelia's on the table. Mother, he said, his voice low but firm, a quiet thunder that commanded the room. Amelia is the mother of your grandchild, She will be a part of this family. She will be treated with the respect she deserves. Is that understood?" Eleanor's lips thinned into a hard line. She gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The rest of the dinner was cloaked in a tense, suffocating silence. As they left the estate that night, Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She had been protected from Mark, but she had just walked into a different kind of battlefield, one with unspoken rules and far more dangerous players. Julian could buy buildings and silence bullies, but he couldn't buy his mother's acceptance. And Amelia knew with a sinking certainty that Eleanor Devereaux was not a woman who gave up a fight easily. Mark Vance was not accustomed to losing. His world was built on a series of calculated wins, aggressive takeovers, and the strategic crushing of smaller competitors. The abrupt, humiliating reversal on the commercial block acquisition was more than a failed business deal. It was a personal affront. One day he was the predator closing in for the kill. The next he was swatted away by an invisible, omnipotent hand. His firm's lawyers were baffled. The holding company Argent Estates was a ghost. It was impeccably legal, massively funded, but its ownership was buried under layers of international corporate veils. All his inquiries hit a dead end. But what truly gnawed at him was the apology he had been strongly advised to send. It felt like bowing to a king he couldn't see. His obsession festered. This wasn't about a plot of land anymore. It was about Amelia. How could she, his quiet, unremarkable ex-wife, have access to this kind of power? The thought was maddening. He started watching her. Not just himself, but he paid a premium to a sleazy private investigator he'd used before, a man named Rick Slater. "I want to know everything," Mark instructed Slater in his sterile, glass-walled office. "Who she's seeing, where she's going, who she's talking to. I want to know who is pulling the strings." Slater, a man who seemed to perpetually smell of stale coffee and cigarettes, nodded eagerly. "You got it, Mr. Vance. It'll cost you." "Just find out," Mark snapped, tossing a thick envelope across his desk. The first few reports from Slater were mundane. Amelia at her shop, Amelia at the grocery store, Amelia walking in the park. But then the photos started to include a recurring figure, a tall, well-dressed man who was always with her. A man who drove a car that cost more than Mark's condo. "He's clean, boss," Slater reported over the phone a week later. "No credit cards in his name, cars registered to a corporation, not a person. This guy is a professional ghost." "A ghost doesn't buy a city block on a whim," Mark snarled. "Dig deeper. I want a name." The breakthrough came a few days later. Slater had managed to get a long lens shot of the man's watch as he helped Amelia into his car. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a rare multi-million-dollar timepiece. There were only a handful in the world. Slater cross-referenced the owners with men who fit the physical description. The list was very, very short, and at the top of it was a name that made Mark's blood freeze. Julian Devereaux. It was impossible. Julian Devereaux didn't exist in the real world. He was a legend, a name whispered in boardrooms, a phantom who moved markets with unseen hands. He never gave interviews, was rarely photographed. Yet here he was in Slater's grainy photos, holding the door for Amelia, his Amelia. Jealousy, hot and acidic, burned in Mark's gut. It was a far more potent emotion than the simple greed that had driven him before. The idea that Amelia, plain simple Amelia, had landed a man like Julian Devereaux was a personal insult of the highest order. It invalidated their entire history, reframing him not as the successful man who had outgrown his wife, but as the fool who had discarded a winning lottery ticket. He stared at the photos, his mind racing. And then he saw it. In one of the newer pictures, Amelia was in profile, handing a bouquet to a customer. Her cardigan was open, and the gentle swell of her belly was no longer subtle. It was the unmistakable, gentle curve of pregnancy. Slater's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Yeah, I was going to mention that. She's definitely pregnant. 4, maybe 5 months along, I'd guess." The timeline clicked into place in Mark's mind with the force of a gunshot. The divorce was a year ago. Her pregnancy was recent. And Julian Devereaux had appeared recently. It all connected. The fat comment he'd thrown at her echoed in his head, a monument to his own spectacular ignorance. She wasn't fat. She was pregnant with a billionaire's heir. A slow, predatory smile spread across Mark's face. The initial shock and jealousy began to recede, replaced by a cold, thrilling wave of calculation. This wasn't a loss. This was an opportunity. An incredible, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Amelia and her billionaire protector thought they had won. They thought they had pushed him out of the picture. But they had underestimated him. He wasn't just a bully who wanted her little shop anymore. He was a man who held a secret that could cause a scandal of epic proportions for the most private billionaire in the world. A Devereaux heir conceived out of wedlock with a divorced florist. The tabloids would pay a fortune for that. But Julian Devereaux, a man who bought city blocks to solve problems, would surely pay more. Much more. Slater, Mark said, his voice dangerously calm. I have a new assignment for you. I want you to find any evidence you can that links me to Amelia around the time of conception. Bank statements showing I paid for her dinner, a witness who saw us talking, anything. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be plausible. You want to pretend the kid is yours? Slater asked, a hint of greasy admiration in his voice. I want to introduce the element of doubt, Mark corrected him. Devereaux is a man who values privacy above all else. A public paternity dispute would be his worst nightmare. And he leaned back in his leather chair, savoring the thought, am about to become his worst nightmare. The blackmail began subtly. It wasn't a direct confrontation, but a series of calculated psychological jabs. First, a package arrived at Petal and Stem. Inside, nestled amongst tissue paper, was a single silver baby rattle and a card with no signature, just two typed words, Happy Family. The message was clear, I know. Amelia's blood ran cold. She knew with sickening certainty who it was from. She immediately called Julian, her voice trembling. He was there in 15 minutes, his security detail sweeping the shop for bugs before he even stepped inside. He held the rattle in his hand, his expression hardening into granite. He's overplayed his hand. Julian said, his voice a low growl. This isn't the move of a smart man. It's the move of a desperate one. But the desperation made Mark more dangerous. A few days later, a gossip columnist for a major city newspaper, a woman known for her vicious takedowns, posted a cryptic story online. It spoke of a reclusive titan of industry and his secret new romance with a humble shop owner with a complicated past. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. The details were just specific enough to be recognizable to anyone in their circle. The article ended with a tantalizing question. What other secrets is this blooming flower hiding? The final blow came directly. Mark called Amelia's personal cell, a number he shouldn't have had. Hello, Amelia, he said, his voice oozing a false friendly tone. I see you're making headlines, or almost making them. I thought we should talk, for old time's sake. What do you want, Mark? She asked, her voice flat, Julian standing beside her, listening on speakerphone. What I want is a conversation. You, me, and your new benefactor, he said, the politeness vanishing. Let's say, a finder's fee, for keeping my mouth shut about your little secret. Let's not forget we were married for 10 years. It wouldn't be hard to convince people that we had a moment of nostalgic weakness. A final farewell. Paternity tests can be messy things. And scandals are so very public. The threat was vile and explicit. He was going to claim the baby was his, dragging them all through a public mudslinging match, tarnishing the Devereaux name and casting doubt on Amelia's character unless he was paid off. I'll have Julian's people arrange a meeting, Amelia said coldly, and hung up. She turned to Julian, her eyes wide with fear. He would do it, Julian. He's shameless. He'll lie. He'll invent stories. Julian pulled her into a comforting embrace. Let him, he said, his voice a steady anchor in her storm of panic. He thinks he's blackmailing a lovesick billionaire. He doesn't understand he's declared war on an empire. While Julian's team prepared for the confrontation, another drama was unfolding in the background. Eleanor Devereaux had seen the gossip column. For her, it was confirmation of her worst fears. She summoned Amelia to the Devereaux estate without Julian. Amelia walked into the grand, intimidating library to find Eleanor standing by the fireplace, a printed copy of the article on the marble mantelpiece. "I warned my son you would be trouble," Eleanor began, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I told him your past would follow you, and here it is. This sordid mess with your ex-husband. This is not my fault," Amelia said, her own fear giving way to a spark of anger. "This is his doing." "It is always the woman's fault," Eleanor retorted icily. "You enter our lives bringing your baggage and your scandals. Now this man is threatening to lay claim to a Devereaux child, a claim that, however false, will stain our family name for years. Did you think of that?" "I am thinking of my child's safety," Amelia shot back, her voice rising. "And I am thinking of the legacy that child is due to inherit." "A legacy you are putting at risk," Eleanor said, taking a step closer. "I have spoken with our lawyers. There is a way to resolve this. An agreement. You will be provided for handsomely. A trust fund for the child, a home for you in another country. You will want for nothing, but you will disappear. You will sign away all rights, and the child will be raised here as a Devereaux, free from the taint of your past." Amelia stared at her, horrified. It was a business transaction. Eleanor wanted to buy her child. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She saw now where Julian got his ruthlessness from, but in his mother it was untempered by his compassion. "No," Amelia said, the word a quiet, unbreakable vow. "Absolutely not. You are not taking my baby." "You are being sentimental and foolish," Eleanor sneered. "I am offering you a life of ease." "You are offering me a prison," Amelia corrected her. "My child is not a commodity, and I am not for sale." She turned and walked out of the library, leaving Eleanor standing in stunned silence. She had fought off her ex-husband's greed and now her potential mother-in-law's tyrannical control. She felt utterly alone, trapped between two monstrously powerful forces with only the unborn life inside her to fight for. Meanwhile, in Mark's penthouse, his fiancée Tiffany was becoming increasingly unnerved. She had admired Mark's ambition, his drive, but his obsession with Amelia was twisting into something ugly. She had overheard parts of his phone calls, the sneering way he talked about his payday, and the mess he was going to create. That evening she saw an email he had left open on his laptop. It was from his PI Slater and contained a fabricated witness statement from a bartender claiming to have seen Mark and Amelia leaving a bar together 2 months after their divorce. The lie was so blatant, so malicious, it made her stomach turn. This wasn't business. This was evil. The man she thought she was going to marry was a monster willing to destroy lives for money. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the laptop, at the perfect face and the expensive jewelry Mark had bought her, and for the first time she felt cheap. A decision began to form in her mind, a risky, terrifying decision to do the right thing. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private suite at the top of the Grand Orion Hotel. Mark arrived first, radiating smug confidence. He felt invincible, holding all the cards. He envisioned the wire transfer, the groveling apology from Amelia, the look of defeat on the face of the great Julian Devereaux. When Julian and Amelia entered, they did not look scared. They looked calm, composed, and utterly resolute. It was the first time Mark had seen Julian in person. The man's presence was like a drop in atmospheric pressure. He was quiet, but his silence held more weight than Mark's loudest threats. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Mark began, leaning back in his chair. "You know what I want. $10 million, wired to an offshore account. In return, I forget all about my lingering connection to Amelia. I disappear and you get to raise your family in peace." Julian didn't even look at him. He was looking at a tablet he'd placed on the table. 10 million is a significant number. Julian said, his voice deceptively mild. Before we discuss that, I'd like to present a counteroffer. He turned the tablet to face Mark. The screen showed a series of documents, financial statements, bank records. These are the financials for your firm, Vance & Associates. Julian continued, his voice turning cold. Specifically, these records detail the funding for the Riverbend Plaza project. You told your investors it cost $80 million. In reality, it cost $65. The $15 million difference was funneled through a series of shell corporations, ending up in a private account in the Cayman Islands, an account under the name M. Vance. That's not just unethical, Mark. It's felony fraud. Mark's face went pale. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly gray pallor. Where did you get that? My resources are considerably greater than yours, Julian said flatly. I also have sworn affidavits from 2 of your former junior partners whom you cheated out of their shares. They were more than happy to cooperate in exchange for immunity. The district attorney is very interested in this. He swiped the screen. A new set of documents appeared. This is your personal tax history for the past 5 years. Or rather, the history you didn't report. The undeclared income from your creative accounting totals just over $4 million. The IRS, as you can imagine, is even more interested than the DA. Mark was speechless. He was breathing heavily, his confident facade crumbling into dust. So this is my counteroffer, Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word a shard of ice. You are going to walk away from us. You are going to liquidate your assets, pay back your investors, and settle your tax bill. Then you're going to leave this city and never contact Amelia or my family again. You will do this, and in return this information, he tapped the tablet, stays private. For now. If I ever hear your name again, if you so much as jaywalk in Amelia's line of sight, I will burn your entire world to the ground. Is that clear? Mark stared, his mind struggling to process the totality of his ruin. He had walked in expecting a payday. He was walking out a broken man. But Julian wasn't finished. There's one more thing, he said. Amelia's phone, which was sitting on the table, lit up. She pressed play. A voice filled the room. Tiffany's voice, clear and steady. It was a recording. He said it himself. He said, "It doesn't have to be true, it just has to be plausible." He hired a PI to fake evidence. He was never with Amelia. He knows the baby isn't his. He was just trying to extort them. He called it his retirement plan. The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Mark looked from the tablet to the phone, utterly defeated. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn, betrayed by his fiancée, exposed by his enemy. He had nothing left. Just then the door to the suite opened. A woman stood there, her expression unreadable. It was Tiffany. She walked over to the table and placed an engagement ring, a gaudy 5-carat diamond, in front of Mark. "I sent the rest of your things to your office," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My lawyer will be in touch about the apartment. I'm not a good person, Mark, but I'm not you." She looked at Amelia, a flicker of genuine remorse in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered before turning and walking out of his life forever. Mark stared at the ring, then at Julian and Amelia. The hatred in his eyes was impotent, the look of a caged animal. He had lost, completely and irrevocably. He slowly got to his feet, his expensive suit looking rumpled and cheap. Without another word, he turned and stumbled out of the room, a man walking toward his own self-inflicted exile. Amelia let out a breath. She didn't realize she'd been holding her body trembling with the release of tension. Julian wrapped a protective arm around her, holding her steady. They had won. They had faced the monster and vanquished him not with money, but with truth. As they rode the elevator down in silence, Amelia felt a profound shift. She wasn't just the woman Julian was protecting anymore. They had faced this together. They were a team. She looked up at him, at the man who wielded his immense power with such surgical precision, not for greed or ego, but to defend her, to defend their future. And in that moment she knew that the feelings she had been so afraid to acknowledge were real. She was falling in love with him. The aftermath of the confrontation at the Grand Orion Hotel was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, implosive collapse. For Mark Vance, the world he had so carefully constructed from arrogance and deceit dissolved overnight. There were no dramatic headlines, no public trials. Julian Devereaux's influence was far too subtle for such crude displays. Instead, Mark was simply erased. His photo vanished from the society pages. His firm's name was chiseled off its own building, and his investors were quietly and fully reimbursed by an anonymous trust, ensuring their silence. Mark was forced into a swift, humiliating liquidation of his personal assets. The penthouse, the Aston Martin, the designer suits all sold to cover the vast debts the IRS and his defrauded partners were now demanding he pay. The last anyone saw of him was a photo snapped by a freelance paparazzo, a grainy image of a gaunt, defeated man boarding a bus at the city's grimiest terminal, carrying a single worn suitcase. He was no longer a player. He was a ghost. A cautionary tale whispered among the city's elite, a man who had declared war on an empire and been annihilated by its silent, crushing gravity. With the shadow of Mark finally lifted, a profound and welcome peace settled over Amelia's life. The final months of her pregnancy unfolded in a calm rhythm she hadn't realized she craved. The constant knot of anxiety in her stomach, a companion for over a year, finally loosened its grip, replaced by the gentle flutters and kicks of her growing baby. Her flower shop, petal and stem, became more than a sanctuary. It became a symbol of her new life being built in collaboration with Julian. The renovation he had funded was a delicate dance between his limitless resources and her specific, heartfelt vision. She didn't want a cold, modern boutique. She wanted warmth, light, and character. So Julian's architects worked alongside her, sourcing reclaimed wood for the counters and installing custom conservatory-style windows that bathed the space in natural light. Julian himself would often appear at the end of the day, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the sawdust and paint fumes, and he would listen intently as she explained her ideas, offering thoughtful suggestions. One afternoon she found him on his hands and knees helping the contractors lay antique terracotta tiles she had fallen in love with. Seeing this titan of industry, a man who could move global markets meticulously, placing tiles in her small shop, filled her with a love so deep it almost frightened her. Their relationship blossomed in these quiet, shared moments. The crisis had forged a bond of trust and protection, but it was the peace that allowed love to grow. They spent evenings assembling a crib in the nursery they'd painted a soft, gentle sage green. They argued playfully over names, spreading books across the floor of his penthouse library. She favored classic, gentle names. He was drawn to strong, historical ones. They finally settled on Alexander, a name that felt like a perfect blend of both. "It means defender of the people," he told her one night, his hand resting on her swollen belly, a look of profound wonder on his face. "It's perfect. He will be strong, but he will be good. Like his mother." The final formidable piece of their new life that needed to fall into place was Eleanor Devereaux. After their tense confrontation in the library, a chilly silence had descended. Amelia knew Julian had been having difficult conversations with his mother, but he shielded her from the details. Then one Tuesday, a week before her due date, Eleanor's Rolls-Royce pulled up outside the newly renovated shop. Amelia saw her through the new glass door, watching as Eleanor stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, seemingly gathering herself before stepping inside. The bell chimed, a soft melodic sound. Eleanor was dressed impeccably, but her usual air of icy command was gone, replaced by a visible uncertainty. She walked through the shop, her gloved fingers lightly touching the edge of a ceramic vase, her gaze taking in the vibrant bursts of color. "It's remarkable," she said, her voice softer than Amelia had ever heard it. "You have a true gift, Amelia. You create life and beauty everywhere you go." "Thank you, Eleanor," Amelia replied, her hand instinctively going to her belly. Eleanor finally met her gaze, and the vulnerability in the older woman's eyes was startling. Julian explained everything to me, in detail, the depths of your ex-husband's depravity and the transaction I attempted to force upon you. A faint embarrassed flush touched her cheeks. In my life I have learned to see threats everywhere. I have had to be ruthless to protect this family, to protect what my husband built. I saw you and your past as a threat. I failed to see your strength. She took a step closer, her eyes glistening. He also told me how you refused my offer without a moment's hesitation. You chose your child over a life of unimaginable ease. I don't know if I would have been so strong so long ago. I was wrong. She said the words clear and deliberate. My methods were cruel and my judgment was clouded by fear. I am asking for your forgiveness. I want to be a grandmother to your son. Please allow me that. The confession was raw and genuine. It was more than a truce. It was an offering of peace, a plea for connection. Amelia felt the last wall around her heart dissolve. There is nothing to forgive, Eleanor, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. We both just want to protect him. 10 days later, on a snowy morning at the dawn of February, Amelia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. Julian was by her side through every moment, his hand a constant, steady anchor in hers. He wiped her brow, whispered words of encouragement, and when their son finally entered the world with a loud, healthy cry, Julian's tears of joy mirrored her own. They named him Alexander Rose Devereaux, the middle name a tribute to the life she had built for herself among the flowers. He had her warm, upturned smile and Julian's unmistakable stormy gray eyes. In the quiet of the private hospital room, the world outside felt a million miles away. Julian sat in a chair by her bed holding Alexander, who was swaddled tightly in a soft blanket. He stared down at the tiny, perfect face with an expression of such fierce, tender love that it brought a fresh wave of tears to Amelia's eyes. I never knew, Julian whispered, looking up at her, his voice thick with emotion. I never knew I could feel anything like this. That afternoon, Eleanor arrived. She came alone without pretense or fanfare. She carried not an extravagant gift, but a small hand-knitted blanket of the softest blue cashmere. She approached the bassinet with a quiet reverence. As she looked down at her grandson, the formidable matriarch, the titan of society, simply vanished. Her carefully composed features melted into the simple, unguarded adoration of a grandmother. She reached in a hesitant finger and Alexander's tiny hand instinctively wrapped around it. A soft, genuine smile lit up Eleanor's face, erasing years of worry and hardness. She looked at Amelia, and their eyes met over the sleeping baby. In that shared gaze, a new family was truly born. Months later, on a warm summer afternoon, Amelia sat on a stone bench in the sprawling gardens of the Devereaux estate. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses, a new strain Eleanor had commissioned and named the Amelia Rose in her honor. Julian was lying in the grass beside her, and on a thick blanket between them 6-month-old Alexander gurgled happily, reaching for his father's outstretched finger. This was her life now. It was not a fairy tale because it was real. It was filled with the quiet, everyday moments of love that felt more magical than any storybook ending. It had all started with a cruel word from a bitter, broken man. Mark had tried to shame her, to define her by a flaw he invented. But his cruelty had been a catalyst, a dark pressure that had revealed the diamond-hard strength within her. He hadn't known that she was already nurturing a new beginning, a future that wasn't built on his shallow world of status, but on the unshakable foundations of love, resilience, and the enduring, ferocious power of a mother. She was no longer Mark Vance's ex-wife. She was Amelia Rosewood, the woman who had grown a garden from the ashes of her past and found a love she never knew she deserved. And so Amelia's journey comes to a close. It began with a moment of public humiliation, a cruel jab from an ex-husband who saw her as nothing more than a reflection of his own shallow values. But he couldn't see what truly mattered: her inner strength, her resilience, and the incredible secret she carried. Her story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the bitter words of those who want to see us fall. It's defined by how we rise. Amelia didn't just rise. She soared, building a fortress of love and integrity around her new family, proving that true power isn't about money or influence, but about protecting what you love. If you were moved by Amelia's story of strength and perseverance, please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. What did you think of Julian's response to the blackmail? Let us know in the comments below. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening. He flaunted his Aston Martin, his Patek Philippe watch, and the 20-something model on his arm, all bought with the money he'd hidden during their divorce. He cornered his ex-wife Chloe in the lobby of a Michelin star restaurant just to mock her second-hand car and her struggling online business. He wanted to make sure she knew he was winning. What he didn't know was that across town, a lawyer was drafting a letter that would inform Chloe of an inheritance so vast it would make his entire lavish lifestyle look like pocket change. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about how a single act of forgotten kindness can change everything, turning a forgotten ex-wife into one of the most powerful women in the country. The chill of the November evening in Boston was nothing compared to the icy dread that washed over Chloe Redmond the moment she saw him. It had been 2 years since the divorce, 2 years of meticulously rebuilding her life from the rubble Jared Adler had left behind. She had been on her way to a modest celebratory dinner with 2 friends, a small victory for her online artisanal flower business finally turning a profit. And now, standing under the gilded awning of Aurelia, the 3 Michelin star restaurant they used to call their spot, was Jared. He wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman who couldn't have been older than 24, with legs that seemed to start at her collarbone, and a cherry-red dress that cost more than Chloe's monthly rent. Madison Cole, a rising Instagram model Chloe had seen splashed across gossip blogs. Jared looked like he'd been sculpted from wealth itself. His bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his gym-honed frame. On his wrist the subtle glint of a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a watch he'd always coveted but claimed they couldn't afford when they were married. He was laughing, a deep, booming sound that used to make Chloe feel safe. Now it just sounded predatory. Chloe tried to shrink back into the shadows, hoping to slip past unnoticed, but Jared's eyes, sharp and calculating as ever, found hers. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He excused himself from his date and strode towards Chloe, his expensive leather shoes clicking menacingly on the marble floor. "Chloe." "Well, look at you," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. His eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of her outfit, a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a department store. A string of her grandmother's pearls her only accessory. "Still shopping off the rack, I see. Some things never change." Chloe's friends Anna and Beth tensed beside her. "Jared." "That's enough," Anna said, her voice firm. Jared ignored her, his focus entirely on his ex-wife. "I heard about your little project," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Petals and pots or something. How's that going? Making dozens of dollars a month, are we? I hope you're reporting it all on your taxes." The barb hit its mark. Chloe had poured her heart, soul, and meager savings into that business. It was her lifeline, the one thing that was truly hers. "It's doing well, thank you," she said, her voice tighter than she wanted. "Is it?" Jared's smile widened. He gestured back towards the curb where a valet was carefully polishing the fender of a midnight blue Aston Martin DB11. "Things are going pretty well for me, too. The private equity firm I joined after leaving the old company made me a junior partner. The buy-in was steep, but the returns—" He chuckled. "Let's just say I don't check price tags anymore." He was intentionally twisting the knife. He had started that firm with the capital he'd hidden offshore during their divorce proceedings. Money Chloe had helped him earn through years of supporting his career, hosting his clients, and managing their life so he could focus on work. The court had seen only a fraction of his true worth. "I have to go, Jared. My friends and I have a reservation," Chloe said, trying to move past him. He stepped in her way. "At Aurelia." "Don't be ridiculous. You can't afford a bottle of water here." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for her friends to hear. "Look, Chloe, I'm not a monster. I feel bad for you, I really do. How's that 2015 Honda Civic holding up? Still getting you from A to B?" He pulled out a sleek carbon fiber wallet. "Here." He tried to press a few $100 bills into her hand. "Go have a nice dinner somewhere else. On me. For old time's sake." The humiliation was a physical force, hot and suffocating. It wasn't just the money, it was the performance. He was doing this for Madison, who was watching with a smug, bored expression. He was doing this for the doorman. He was doing this to reinforce the narrative he had built, that he was the winner and she was the loser. Chloe's hand trembled as she pushed his away. The money fluttered to the ground. "I don't want your money, Jared. I never did. I just wanted a partner. A husband, not a competitor." His face hardened, the faux pity vanishing, replaced by the cold anger she knew so well. "You were holding me back, Chloe. You were an anchor. Look at me now. Look at you. The proof is right here." He turned his back on her, sauntering back to his date, who rewarded him with a kiss. Chloe stood frozen for a moment, the crisp $100 bills lying at her feet like an insult. The doorman averted his eyes, pretending not to see. Anna quietly picked up the money and tucked it into Chloe's purse. "Let's go," Beth whispered, gently steering a shell-shocked Chloe away from the restaurant. "We'll go to Giovanni's. It's better anyway." As they walked away, Chloe didn't dare look back. The image of Jared's smug face, the glint of his watch, and the sleek lines of his car were burned into her mind. Later that night, sitting in her small apartment, the celebratory mood long gone, she finally let the tears fall. She felt utterly and completely defeated. She had no idea that hundreds of miles away in a quiet, wood-paneled office, a chain of events had just been set in motion by a man she had never even met, a man who was about to hand her the power to shatter Jared's world. The week following the encounter at Aurelia was a blur of forced cheerfulness and gnawing self-doubt. Chloe threw herself into her work, arranging bouquets of winter roses and rare hellebores, until her fingers were raw, the sweet scent of the flowers a stark contrast to the bitterness in her heart. Jared's words echoed in her mind. "You were an anchor." Was he right? Had she been the dead weight in their marriage? Her small two-bedroom apartment felt less like a cozy sanctuary and more like a cage of mediocrity. The profit she'd been so proud of now seemed pathetic. It was on a dreary Thursday afternoon that the letter arrived. It stood out from the usual stack of bills and junk mail like a relic from another era. The envelope was thick and heavy, made of a creamy textured cardstock that felt expensive to the touch. There was no stamp, only a neat postmark indicating it had been delivered by a private courier. Her name and address were handwritten in an elegant looping script. In the top left corner, embossed in a deep navy blue, were the words "Chen and Associates Attorneys at Law," with an address on Park Avenue, New York City. Chloe's stomach twisted into a knot. A New York law firm. Her first thought was that Jared was suing her, perhaps for slander, or maybe he'd found some forgotten marital asset he wanted to claim. He was certainly vindictive enough. With trembling hands, she tore it open. The letter inside was on matching paper, the text crisp and formal. "Dear Ms. Chloe Redmond, this letter serves as a formal request for your presence at our offices located at 230 Park Avenue, New York, NY at your earliest possible convenience. We are acting as the executors of the estate of our late client, Mr. Arthur Pemberton. The matter we wish to discuss is of the utmost importance and confidentiality, pertaining directly to Mr. Pemberton's final will and testament. Please contact my assistant, Ms. Albright, at the number provided below to arrange a meeting. We will of course cover all travel and accommodation expenses. Sincerely, David Chen, Senior Partner, Chen and Associates. Chloe read the letter 3 times. Arthur Pemberton. The name meant nothing to her. She searched her memory, scrolling through years of acquaintances, clients, and distant relatives. Nothing. It had to be a mistake. They must have the wrong Chloe Redmond. Her second thought was that it was a scam. A very elaborate, very sophisticated phishing attempt. But why would a scammer offer to fly her to New York and put her up in a hotel? Driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, she decided to do some research. She booted up her old laptop and typed Chen and Associates into the search bar. The firm was real, and it was one of the most prestigious estate planning firms in the country, specializing in ultra-high net worth individuals. Their client list was rumored to include tech billionaires, old money dynasties, and international financiers. Next, she searched for Arthur Pemberton. The results were sparse, but what she found was staggering. Arthur Pemberton was a reclusive, legendary figure in the world of technology and engineering. He was the founder of Pemberton Industries, a privately held behemoth that had pioneered innovations in renewable energy, battery technology, and advanced materials. The few articles she found described him as an eccentric genius, a man who hadn't been photographed in public for over 30 years. There was a single grainy black and white photo from the 1970s of a young man with intense eyes and unruly hair. An obituary dated 2 weeks prior confirmed he had passed away at the age of 88, leaving no known children or immediate family. His net worth was estimated by financial magazines to be in the tens of billions. This only deepened the mystery. What could a man like that possibly have to do with her, a small business owner in Boston who drove a 10-year-old Honda? She called her friend Anna, her voice shaking as she read the letter aloud. "Chloe, this is insane," Anna said. "It sounds like something out of a movie. What if it's real?" "It can't be," Chloe insisted. "I've never met this man. I've never even heard of him. It's a mistake." "There's only one way to find out," Anna urged. "Call them. What have you got to lose? They're paying for the trip. At worst, it's a weird mix-up and you get a free trip to New York. At best. Well, who knows?" Summoning every ounce of her courage, Chloe dialed the number on the letterhead. A calm, professional voice answered. "Chen and Associates, Ms. Albright speaking." "Hello, my name is Chloe Redmond," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I received a letter from a Mr. David Chen." There was no surprise or confusion in the woman's voice. "Ah, yes, Ms. Redmond. We've been expecting your call. Mr. Chen has cleared his schedule for you. When would be a good time for you to travel to New York? We can have a car sent to you in Boston tomorrow morning and a suite booked at the St. Regis." The seamless efficiency of it all was disarming. This wasn't a mistake. They knew exactly who she was. Chloe, feeling as though she were moving through a dream, agreed to a meeting 2 days later. After she hung up, she sat in stunned silence. The world around her, the half-finished floral arrangements, the stack of unpaid invoices, the faint scent of wilted leaves seemed to fade into the background. For the first time since she saw Jared at the restaurant, a new feeling began to bloom in her chest, pushing aside the humiliation and despair. It was a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. She had no idea what was waiting for her in New York, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that her life was about to change forever. The Lincoln town car that arrived outside her modest apartment building was so black it seemed to absorb the morning light. The driver, a stoic man in a crisp suit, held the door for her as if she were royalty. The 2-hour journey to New York was a silent, surreal glide down the highway. Chloe stared out the window, the familiar New England landscape blurring past, feeling a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The offices of Chen and Associates were on the 40th floor of the MetLife building with a panoramic view of the city that made Chloe feel dizzy. The reception area was a study in understated power slate. Gray walls, a single dramatic orchid on a teak table, and the hushed, reverent silence of serious money. Ms. Albright, an impeccably dressed woman in her 50s, greeted her by name and led her down a long hallway to a corner office. David Chen rose from behind a vast mahogany desk as she entered. He was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes, a perfectly tailored gray suit, and an air of quiet authority. "Ms. Redmond, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, shaking her hand warmly. His grip was firm and reassuring. "Please have a seat. Can I get you some tea, coffee, water?" Chloe, feeling completely out of her depth, simply asked for water. As he poured it for her from a crystal carafe, she took in the office. It was filled with books, legal tomes mixed with classics of literature and philosophy. There were no flashy displays of wealth, only quality and substance. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I have to tell you, I think there's been a terrible mistake. I don't know anyone named Arthur Pemberton." David Chen smiled gently. He sat down opposite her in a plush leather armchair. "I assure you, Ms. Redmond, there is no mistake. Arthur knew who you were, though I suspect you would have no reason to remember him." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Ms. Redmond, Arthur Pemberton passed away 2 weeks ago. I was his lawyer, his executor, and I'm honored to say his friend for over 40 years. He was a very private man. He had no living family, and in his last will and testament, which I have right here," he gestured to a thick leather-bound document on his desk, "he named you as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate." Chloe stared at him, uncomprehending. The words hung in the air, seeming to have no meaning. "Sole beneficiary of his whole estate." "Yes. But I read online. They said he was worth billions." "The initial valuations are still underway, but yes," Mr. Chen said calmly. "The liquid assets, stock portfolio, and real estate holdings of the Pemberton estate are valued at approximately $4.7 billion. This does not include Pemberton Industries itself, which is a privately held entity and valued considerably higher." The room began to spin. Chloe gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. $4.7 billion. The number was so immense it was abstract, nonsensical. It was more money than she could possibly conceive of. Why, she finally whispered the word, catching in her throat. "Why me? It makes no sense." Mr. Chen opened a folder on his lap. Arthur was a man who valued character above all else. He believed that small, unseen acts of kindness were the truest measure of a person. He instructed me to share a story with you, a memory he cherished. He began to read from a typed page. 5 years ago, on a Tuesday in October, there was a torrential downpour in Boston. An old man, frail and stubborn, had insisted on walking to the grocery store himself. On his way home, the paper bag soaked through and his groceries spilled all over the sidewalk. Cars splashed by, people hurried past under their umbrellas, ignoring him. The old man, soaked and shivering, was about to give up when a young woman pulled her car over. She got out in the rain without a coat and helped him gather every last item. She then insisted on driving him home, her car seats getting soaked. She helped him carry his groceries up 3 flights of stairs to his small, unassuming apartment. The old man, who looked like he didn't have 2 pennies to his name, offered her the $20 in his wallet. The young woman refused, simply saying, "Please just have a warm cup of tea and stay safe." She then left, never knowing who he was. Chloe's mind flashed back. She remembered it now. A rainy day, an old man with kind, tired eyes, a small, cluttered apartment that smelled of old books and Earl Grey tea. It was an insignificant event, an act of common decency she had performed and forgotten within the hour. "That was you, wasn't it, Ms. Redmond?" Mr. Chen asked softly. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. "Yes, I remember him. I had no idea. That old man was Arthur Pemberton." Chen finished. "He had a small apartment in Boston he used as a private refuge, a place no one knew about. He said in all his years, surrounded by people who wanted his money and his power, you were one of the only people who had ever shown him genuine, unprompted kindness with absolutely nothing to gain. He started following your life from a distance. He knew about your marriage to Jared Adler. He knew about the difficult divorce. He saw your resilience as you started your own business from scratch. He saw in you the integrity and strength he valued above all else. Chloe was speechless, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion. This reclusive billionaire had been a silent observer of her life. "The inheritance is yours," Chloe, Mr. Chen said, using her first name for the first time. "The houses, the investments, the charitable foundation he established in your name. It's all yours." He paused, his expression becoming more complex. "However, there is one significant condition attached to the most valuable asset of all Pemberton Industries. A condition, yes." Arthur was a brilliant man, but he also held a grudge. His greatest business rival for decades was a man named Augustus Kane, the founder of Kane Global Enterprises. Arthur believed Kane was a ruthless, unethical man who prioritized profit over people. He spent years developing a revolutionary technology, a new form of decentralized sustainable energy grid he called Project Nightingale. It was his life's work, something he believed could change the world. He was months away from launching it when he fell ill. Mr. Chen looked her directly in the eyes. "To inherit control of Pemberton Industries, you must personally oversee the successful launch of Project Nightingale within 1 year. And you must do so while fending off his rival. Augustus Kane is the primary investor and chairman of the board at the private equity firm where your ex-husband Jared Adler is now a partner." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't just a gift. It was a posthumous act of war, and Arthur Pemberton had just chosen her as his general. He was giving her not only the money to be free from Jared, but the weapon to destroy his entire world. The days that followed the meeting with David Chen were a disorienting whirlwind. Chloe felt like a diver who had surfaced too quickly, the world around her warped and unreal. One moment she was worrying about a $500 invoice for Dutch tulips. The next she was sitting in a bank boardroom with stern-faced financial advisors who used terms like asset allocation, trust structures, and diversified portfolios. The initial transfer of liquid assets to an account in her name was a string of numbers on a screen so long it looked like a programming error. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her independence, now felt claustrophobic and absurd. Mr. Chen's team had arranged for her to move into one of Arthur's properties for security reasons. A magnificent penthouse on Commonwealth Avenue overlooking the public garden. It was a world of polished marble floor-to-ceiling windows and silent, efficient staff. Chloe would often wake up in the middle of the night in the enormous king-size bed, her heart pounding, convinced it was all an elaborate dream. But it was the second part of her inheritance that truly consumed her, the challenge. Pemberton Industries. David Chen had hand-delivered a personal letter from Arthur written on his deathbed. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were forged in steel. "Chloe," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have passed on, and David has followed my instructions. I apologize for thrusting this upon you, but I do not believe in chance. The universe put you in my path on that rainy day, and I saw in you a strength you may not yet see in yourself. I am leaving you my company, not as a burden, but as a tool. Kane Global and the vultures who flock to it like your ex-husband represent everything I despise: greed without vision, ambition without soul. They would steal my technology, bastardize it for short-term profit, and crush the very spirit of innovation it represents. Project Nightingale is more than a product. It's a legacy. It is the culmination of my life's work. I am not asking you to be an engineer or a scientist. The teams I have in place are the best in the world. I am asking you to be its guardian. I am asking you to lead. Your kindness is not a weakness, as men like your ex-husband believe. It is your sharpest weapon. Do not let them win. Honor the spirit of the project, see it through, and the company and its future will be yours unconditionally." The letter settled something deep inside her. The fear began to recede, replaced by a nascent, steely resolve. This was her purpose. Arthur hadn't just given her an escape. He'd given her a mission. Her first day at the Pemberton Industries headquarters, A sprawling state-of-the-art campus of glass and steel just outside Boston was terrifying. She traded her familiar jeans and sweaters for a tailored power suit selected by a personal stylist. As she walked through the atrium, a massive space with a living wall of green plants, she could feel the eyes of hundreds of employees on her. The whispers followed her. Who is she? Where did she come from? The boardroom was even more intimidating. It was filled with the company's senior executives, mostly men in their 50s and 60s, who had been loyal to Arthur for decades. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright suspicion. The COO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Barbara Vance, did not hide her apprehension. "Ms. Redmond," Barbara began, her voice crisp. "With all due respect, Mr. Pemberton was a singular genius. This company is a complex, multi-billion-dollar operation. Project Nightingale alone has over 1,000 moving parts. What qualifications do you possibly have to lead us?" It was the question Chloe had been dreading, the one that echoed Jared's taunts. "You were an anchor. You're not enough." Chloe took a deep breath, clutching the memory of Arthur's letter like a shield. She looked around the table, meeting each of their gazes. "You're right, Ms. Vance," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I am not a scientist. I am not an engineer. I can't tell you the difference between lithium-ion and solid-state batteries. My qualification is not on a resume. My qualification is that the man who built this entire company from the ground up, the genius you all respected, chose me. He didn't choose a seasoned CEO. He didn't choose a corporate raider. He chose me. He trusted me to be the guardian of his legacy, and I will not let him down." She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not here to redesign your schematics. I'm here to empower you to do what you do best. My job is to protect this project, to provide you with every resource you need, and to fight the battles outside these walls so you can win the war inside them." Arthur Pemberton saw an enemy on the horizon in Kane Global and Jared Adler's firm. "My single most important qualification is that I know that enemy better than any of you." A silence fell over the room. She had not been defensive. She had been direct. She had acknowledged her limitations but framed them as a unique strength. She saw a flicker of respect in Barbara Vance's eyes. It was a start. The transformation was grueling. Chloe spent the next few weeks in a crash course, working 18-hour days. She devoured briefing documents, financial reports, and technical summaries of Project Nightingale. She held one-on-one meetings with every department head, not pretending to understand their work, but asking them what they needed, what obstacles they faced, and who their best people were. She listened more than she talked. Slowly, she began to see the shape of the battlefield. Kane Global was already making moves, trying to poach key engineers and filing frivolous patent disputes to slow them down. Jared's firm was providing the financial muscle and the aggressive strategy. They were circling, waiting for the leaderless Pemberton Industries to falter. Chloe knew a quiet defense wouldn't be enough. Arthur wanted her to fight. She needed to make a move, something bold and decisive that would announce to the world and to Jared that Pemberton Industries was not adrift. It was under new and formidable command. For weeks, the financial world had been buzzing with rumors. The death of the reclusive Arthur Pemberton had left a massive power vacuum. Pemberton Industries, long a sleeping giant, was suddenly in play. Vultures like Augustus Kane circled, waiting for the estate to be carved up or for the company to be sold for parts. The identity of Pemberton's heir was the biggest mystery on Wall Street, a closely guarded secret by David Chin. Jared Adler followed the news with ravenous interest. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. With Kane's backing his firm, Apex Capital was preparing a hostile takeover bid. The crown jewel they were after was Pemberton's patent portfolio, especially the whispers of a game-changing energy project. "The company is rudderless," Jared announced at an Apex Partners meeting, radiating confidence. He paced in front of a glass wall overlooking the Boston Harbor. "Whoever the heir is, it's probably some distant, clueless relative who will take the first 9-figure check we slide across the table. We'll absorb their tech, fire half their staff, and triple our valuation inside of 2 years." Madison, who was waiting for him in his office, was less interested in the details and more in the results. "So, does this mean we can finally close on the house in the Hamptons?" she asked, scrolling through her phone. "Baby, after this deal we can buy the whole damn Hamptons," Jared boasted, kissing her. He felt invincible. His invincibility lasted until the following Monday morning. He was sipping an espresso and scanning the Wall Street Journal when a headline made him choke. Pemberton Industries stuns market with $500 million acquisition of Cobalt X exclusive supplier of ethically sourced cobalt. Jared's heart hammered against his ribs. Cobalt X was a crucial mining and refining company in the battery supply chain. Apex Capital had been in quiet, aggressive negotiations to acquire them for months. It was a linchpin of their strategy to control the resources needed for next-generation batteries, effectively kneecapping any competitor like Pemberton. Someone had outmaneuvered them, paying a 30% premium in an all-cash deal that had materialized over a single weekend. Someone had stolen their prize right from under their noses. Furious, he stormed into his office and got Augustus Kane on the phone. "Who the hell is running Pemberton?" Jared yelled. "Who is this new heir? We need a name. We're working on it." Kane's gravelly voice rasped from the speaker. "My sources say the board was just as surprised. This move was orchestrated entirely by the new owner. They're being very quiet." The mystery only fueled the market's excitement. The acquisition was seen as a brilliant, aggressive move, signaling that Pemberton Industries was not for sale. It was on the offensive. For Chloe, the decision had been a terrifying gamble. It was her first major act as the new head of the company. Barbara Vance and the finance team had advised against it, calling it an overpay. "It's not just about the cobalt, Barbara," Chloe had argued in a late-night strategy session. "It's about the message. We're drawing a line in the sand. We're telling Kane and we're telling my ex-husband that the days of Pemberton Industries being a passive player are over. We will not be hunted. We are the hunters now." She had authorized the deal, her hand shaking as she signed the documents that committed $500 million. 2 days later, she decided it was time to step out of the shadows. Pemberton Industries issued a formal press release officially announcing its new chairman and CEO. The news broke across every major financial news network. Jared was in a meeting when his phone began vibrating incessantly. He ignored it until his partner burst into the room, his face pale. "Jared, you need to see this." He handed Jared his tablet. On the screen was an article from Forbes. The headline read, "The mysterious heir, Chloe Redmond, takes the helm at Pemberton Industries, signals aggressive new direction." Beneath the headline was a picture of Chloe. It wasn't the timid, heartbroken woman he had last seen. This was a photo taken by a professional. She was standing in the atrium of the Pemberton headquarters dressed in a sharp navy blue suit. Her hair was styled, her makeup was flawless, but it was her eyes that made Jared's blood run cold. They were filled with a calm, unyielding fire he had never seen before. He read her official statement. "I am honored to carry on Arthur Pemberton's legacy of innovation and integrity. Pemberton Industries will be investing heavily in the future, starting with the imminent launch of Project Nightingale, a technology that will reshape the global energy landscape. We welcome the competition." Jared felt the air leave his lungs. It was impossible. A prank. A nightmare. Chloe. His Chloe. The woman who organized charity bake sales and arranged flowers, running a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. He stumbled out of the meeting, his mind reeling. He got in his car and drove fast and reckless to the Pemberton headquarters. He didn't have a plan. He was fueled by pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. He found her just as she was leaving for the day, stepping out of the main entrance and walking toward a waiting black Maybach, a car that made his Aston Martin look like a toy. "Chloe!" he yelled, his voice raw. She turned, her expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised to see him. She simply waited. "What is this?" he sputtered, gesturing wildly. "What kind of game are you playing? Did you win the lottery? Who are you sleeping with?" Chloe looked at him, not with the hurt or anger he expected, but with something that looked almost like pity. "It's no game, Jared," she said, her voice cool and even. "This is my company now. This is my life." "Your company? You couldn't even balance our checkbook," he scoffed, his voice dripping with the old familiar venom. "Who is Pemberton? How did you pull this off?" "He was a man who appreciated kindness," Chloe said simply. "Something you wouldn't understand. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board dinner to attend." She turned to get into her car. Jared, desperate and furious, grabbed her arm. "You think you can just waltz in and play CEO? You think you can go up against me and Augustus Kane? We will crush you. We will bury you and this entire company." Chloe slowly turned her head, her eyes locking onto his hand on her arm. She didn't flinch. She just stared at it until he, unnerved by her utter lack of fear, let go. "You know Jared?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "For the longest time I believed you when you said I was an anchor. But I've come to realize something. I wasn't the anchor. I was the harbor. I was the safe place you came back to while you were building your little pirate ship. The thing is, the harbor is stationary. It's safe. But a ship without a harbor, sooner or later, it gets lost in a storm." Without another word, she slipped into the back seat of the Maybach. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, and the car pulled away, leaving Jared standing alone in the parking lot, choking on the dust of his own shattered reality. The war had begun. The battle between Pemberton Industries and the Apex-Kane alliance escalated into a full-blown corporate war. It was fought not with armies, but with algorithms, lawyers, and public relations firms. Jared, fueled by a toxic cocktail of wounded pride and avarice, came at Chloe with everything he had. He launched a smear campaign in the financial press, feeding anonymous sources to reporters who wrote scathing articles questioning Chloe's competence. They painted her as an unqualified heiress, a lucky fool in over her head, and predicted the imminent collapse of Pemberton Industries under her naive leadership. He hired away 2 of Pemberton's mid-level engineers, hoping to gain insider knowledge about Project Nightingale. He filed a dozen frivolous lawsuits challenging old patents and supply contracts designed to bleed Chloe's company of time and money. But he underestimated her. And he drastically underestimated the loyalty Arthur Pemberton had inspired. The core team at Pemberton, now fiercely protective of Chloe, rallied around her. Barbara Vance, the once skeptical COO, became her most trusted lieutenant, working tirelessly to counter Jared's moves. They fought the lawsuits, shored up employee morale, and under Chloe's direction accelerated the timeline for Project Nightingale. Chloe proved to be a natural leader, not because she was a technical expert, but because she understood people. She remembered the names of the security guards, ate lunch in the main cafeteria, and listened to the concerns of the junior programmers. She fostered a culture of collaborative innovation that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat environment at Apex Capital. Despite their strong defense, the pressure was immense. Kane Global had deep pockets, and Jared's aggression was relentless. He seemed to anticipate some of their moves as if he had a source inside their walls. A key supplier negotiation would suddenly fall through. A strategic partner would back out at the last minute for a better offer from Apex. Chloe and Barbara began to suspect a leak. The stress was taking a toll on Jared, too. His obsession with destroying Chloe became all-consuming. He was constantly on the phone, barking at lawyers, traders, and his new fiancée. The carefree, triumphant man Madison Cole had attached herself to was being replaced by a paranoid, angry workaholic. The shopping sprees became less frequent, the romantic dinners non-existent. Their luxury lifestyle, which she had considered a permanent state, now felt precarious, tied entirely to this vindictive war against his ex-wife. Madison was no fool. She had chosen Jared for his success, for the security and status he provided. She watched him pour millions of Apex's and by extension Kane's money into this personal vendetta with diminishing returns. She also watched Chloe. She saw her on the cover of Wired magazine, profiled as a new titan of tech. She saw paparazzi shots of her leaving charity galas looking poised and powerful. She saw the Pemberton Industries stock, which had been listed on a private exchange, steadily climbing. Madison did the math. Jared was fighting a war against a woman who had more money, more public goodwill, and a revolutionary product. He was losing, and if he lost, she lost. The Birkin bags, the apartment on Beacon Hill, the promise of a house in the Hamptons, it would all evaporate. Self-preservation, her sharpest instinct kicked in. One evening, Chloe was working late with Barbara and her head of security, a former FBI agent named Frank. They were trying to find the source of the leak. "It has to be someone at the executive level," Frank said, pointing to a diagram of their internal communications. "The information he's getting is too specific." Just then, Chloe's personal assistant buzzed her. "Ma'am, you have an anonymous call on your private line. The person refuses to give a name but says it's about Apex Capital." Chloe hesitated, then nodded. "Put it through." She put the phone on speaker. A woman's voice, digitally disguised but recognizably female, came through the line. "Is this Chloe Redmond?" "It is." "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm a concerned party. I have information about Apex Capital's strategy regarding Project Nightingale. They found a potential vulnerability in your supply chain, a microchip manufacturer in Taiwan. They're planning a corporate raid next week to acquire a controlling interest and cut you off completely." Chloe, Barbara, and Frank stared at each other in stunned silence. This was the exact move they had been wargaming as Jared's most devastating potential attack. "Why are you telling me this?" Chloe asked, her mind racing. "Jared Adler is reckless," the voice said, a hint of genuine anger seeping through the digital filter. "He's going to run that company and my investment into the ground with this stupid obsession. I prefer to back the winning horse. There's a data file being sent to you now through an encrypted channel. It has everything. Apex's internal memos, their offer sheet for the manufacturer, everything. Use it well." The line went dead. A moment later, a file appeared on Chloe's laptop. Frank immediately set to work verifying its authenticity and scrubbing it for malware. "It's real," he announced 20 minutes later, his eyes wide. "My God, this is their entire playbook for the next 6 months." Barbara looked at Chloe. "This changes everything. We can preempt every move they make. We can set traps. We can crush them." Chloe felt a chill. She knew with absolute certainty who the anonymous caller was. The reference to "my investment" was the tell. Madison wasn't invested in Apex Capital. She was invested in the lifestyle it provided. She had seen the writing on the wall and had decided to switch her allegiance to the new nexus of power. She was betraying Jared to secure her own future. It was a ruthless, cynical move, and it was the most powerful weapon Chloe had been handed yet. She looked at the files on her screen, a ghost in Jared's machine sent by the woman who was sleeping in his bed. "All right," Chloe said, a hard edge to her voice. "Let's get to work. It's time to stop playing defense." Armed with Madison's intel, Chloe and her team didn't just counter Jared's attacks. They turned them into traps. When Apex's raiders went to Taiwan to buy the microchip company, they found that Pemberton Industries had already acquired it 2 days prior using an offshore shell corporation. When Jared tried to poach their head of marketing, he discovered the man had already signed a new ironclad contract with a bonus that dwarfed Apex's offer, a negotiation prompted by Chloe's foreknowledge. For every punch Jared threw, Chloe was already there holding a granite wall. His frustration grew into paranoia. He accused his partners of incompetence, his lawyers of ineptitude. He couldn't understand how she was always one step ahead. The atmosphere at Apex Capital grew toxic, and investors, including the notoriously impatient Augustus Kane, began to get nervous. The culmination of it all was the launch of Project Nightingale. Chloe orchestrated an event that was part tech conference, part World Fair. She invited scientists, government officials, and press from all over the globe to the Pemberton campus. The centerpiece of the presentation was a live demonstration, a miniature self-sustaining town on the campus grounds, powered entirely and independently by the Nightingale grid. It was a stunning, undeniable success. As the news went viral, Pemberton's private valuation skyrocketed. Governments and multinational corporations immediately began inquiries about licensing the technology. Project Nightingale wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. Chloe, standing on the stage delivering a speech about a future of clean, accessible energy for all, was no longer just an heiress. She was a visionary. For Jared, the news was a death knell. As Pemberton's star ascended, Apex's plummeted. Their investors saw that they had bet on the wrong horse in the energy race. Augustus Kane, in a brutal, decisive move, called an emergency board meeting. He personally orchestrated the vote to remove Jared as partner, citing his reckless and value-destroying vendetta. He was forced to sell his shares at a catastrophic loss to cover the firm's debts. Within 48 hours, Jared Adler was ruined. He lost his job, his partnership, and the vast majority of his wealth. The creditors came for the Aston Martin first. Then came the notice of foreclosure on his penthouse. The final betrayal came from Madison. The moment the news of Jared's ousting broke, she packed her bags, the expensive ones he'd bought for her, and left. She sent him a simple text. "Sorry, Jared. I can't do this. I wish you the best." She was already in talks with a divorce lawyer to see what she could get from their brief engagement. Broken, humiliated, and alone, Jared did the one thing he could think of. He drove his rented sedan to the one place he knew he could find Chloe, her old apartment. He didn't know why he went there, but it was the only place that felt real. He found her there, packing up the last of her personal belongings into boxes. She had kept the apartment, using it as a quiet place to think. She saw him through the window, and after a moment's hesitation, let him in. He was a ghost of the man who had mocked her at Aurelia. His expensive suit was rumpled. His face was pale, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a desperate, hollow look. "They're gone, Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Everything. The firm, the money. Madison. It's all gone." Chloe continued placing books into a box, her movements calm and deliberate. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jared." "Sorry?" He let out a harsh, broken laugh. "You did this. You planned this all along, didn't you? This elaborate revenge fantasy?" Chloe finally stopped and looked at him. "No, Jared, you did this. This was never about revenge for me. This was about survival. It was about building something, not tearing someone down. You were just an obstacle my benefactor wanted cleared from the path." Desperation made him change tactics. He softened his voice, trying to conjure the ghost of the man she had once loved. "Chloe, remember us. Remember what we had. It was real. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I lost my way. But I never stopped loving you." He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched. "We can start again. You have everything. We could have everything." It was the most pathetic, transparent plea she had ever heard, and she felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. Just a profound sense of distance, as if she were looking at a stranger. "The best thing you ever did for me, Jared, was leaving me," she said, her voice soft but final. "You thought you were setting yourself free, but you were setting me free. Free to discover what I was capable of without you telling me I was worthless." She paused, then delivered the final quiet blow. "By the way, you should know that your biggest leak wasn't in your company. It was in your bedroom. Madison was my anonymous source for the last 6 months. She knew you were sinking the ship, and she just wanted a new lifeboat." The last vestiges of color drained from Jared's face. The knowledge that he had been betrayed by both the woman he left and the woman he chose completely shattered him. Chloe picked up a box labeled Memories. She walked to the door and held it open. "Goodbye, Jared. I hope you find your way, but my harbor is closed for good." He stumbled out into the hallway, a broken man with nothing left but the consequences of his own cruelty. Chloe closed the door, leaning against it for a long moment. She didn't feel a surge of victory. She simply felt free. The storm had passed. Her journey hadn't been about a billionaire's inheritance or corporate warfare. It had been about finding the person she was meant to be, a person who had been there all along, just waiting for the anchor to be lifted. And as she looked around the small apartment where her new life had begun, she smiled. It was time to go build the future. And that's where Chloe's story truly begins. Not with the signing of a check, but with the closing of a door on her past. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the people who leave us, but by the strength we find within ourselves when we're forced to stand alone. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness we perform are for strangers, and we never know how or when that compassion will come back to us, often in the most unexpected and life-altering ways. Jared thought wealth was about what you could buy, but Chloe learned it was about what you could build. What did you think of Chloe's journey? Was Jared's downfall deserved, or was Madison the true villain of the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of vindication and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.